It now turns out that they let out 37 prisoners by mistake that they weren't supposed to let out, and these were all prisoners who had breached restraining orders. In other words, probably domestic abusers who'd beaten up their partners and been given restraining orders. Don't go near her again. They break that restraining order, and then so they will end up in prison. They let them out. I mean, it's a mistake. They say, oh, sorry, we got it wrong. Great. And they managed to round up all but 5. Quite what the 5 are up to, one dreads to think. But this seems to me to be a kind of lackadaisical failure to care about the welfare of the victims of domestic violence. So let's talk to an independent domestic abuse specialist, a former police officer, Bridie Anderson. Welcome to the show, Bridie.
Hi there, thank you.
I mean, you know, it was bad enough, wasn't it, when they fast-tracked domestic abusers to be let out when those 1,700 prisoners were released recently. And by the way, that's only the beginning. We're going to let out 5,000 or 6,000 altogether. So they fast-tracked domestic abusers. A lot of victims. I spoke to a victim and said, no, these are the last people you should let out. They're the worst reoffenders in the whole of the crime zone. And now it turns out that they let out 37 prisoners by mistake who were jailed for breaching restraining orders, which tends to indicate they'd already reoffended. I mean, as I say, you know, everybody makes mistakes, but it just seems to play into the idea that the authorities don't care much about the victims of domestic abuse.
It's certainly how victims feel. They feel less important, less valued, not a priority, rather than domestic abuse being an aggravating factor, which should actually make it more serious, because it's not someone being terrorised on the street by a stranger. It's intimate. Yeah. It's making the one place we should all feel safe, which is at home, unsafe and dangerous. The messaging this is giving, it's really dangerous in and of itself. You know, even if they round up all of these mistakenly released people, we don't know what harm has been caused in the interim, and the impact it's had on the, you know, how safe women and girls particularly are going to feel.
And they sort of say, Bridie, they go, oh, all victims have been contacted after the incorrect release of inmates. Well, that's one thing. But, I mean, you know this scenario. I mean, imagine being the victims of these people who've broken restraining orders, the poor women, often with their children, getting this call. Oh, hello, I'm afraid we've mistakenly let out the man that beat the hell out of you. I mean, what must go through a woman's mind when she gets that call?
Terror. Absolute terror. They will feel alone, they will feel frightened, scared, probably confused, isolated. You know, if they can't trust the very system that encourages them to report and support prosecutions and disclose offences, if this happens, it's going to leave them feeling incredibly vulnerable and potentially reluctant to report again.
And the very nature of this story proves the basic point that I was making earlier, because we covered the story, obviously, with the big release of the 1,700 prisoners, many of them domestic abusers. And the victims say, no, these people always reoffend. I mean, they are possessed of a kind of obsession, you know, to dominate and beat up these poor women, often with their kids around. That is always a picture that haunts me. Awful to have poor little kids watching their mum being beaten up. It's a terrible business, but it must strike a real chord with you and the people you represent when you hear 37 prisoners who were jailed for, wait for it, breaching restraining orders. These are domestic abusers who were ordered by a court. Don't go near that woman again. Don't go near the woman you've been torturing, whose life you've made hell. That's a court order, but they can't stop themselves, can they?
It's incredibly worrying, because the very nature of the offending that led to them getting a restraining order talks about a level, like you say, of obsession, of stalking, fixated on that person. we tend to see perpetrators of this nature being incredibly relentless in seeking what they would consider revenge against their victims. So yes, the nature of the offence that's been wrongly charged and therefore has led to this kind of system error, it's just awful, because like you said, it already shows that they have a pattern of offending that talks to this need to repeatedly target a particular individual. They should be the most serious offences and the most dangerous offenders, and yet they're the ones that have slipped through the net because of what we're calling a system error.
I mean,
Not good enough.
it's just dreadful. But Bridie, I ain't no saint, a long way from it. But I just don't understand men who want to beat up women. What is wrong with them? Shame on them. And I'm very sorry for you and all the people that you represent who have had to suffer this mass release and now this mistaken release. It's an absolute scandal. But thank you very much for talking to me, for giving me the time. That's Bridie Anderson, independent domestic abuse specialist and a former police officer. What do you reckon of that? Sorry, 37. Oh, we made a mistake. It's pathetic, isn't it? It's